Hello, and welcome to The Alt Left.
Welcome back, everybody. Here is part 2 of the interview that you've been waiting to hear for our interview with the cop. Part 2 is just as good as part 1. It just, as you can tell from the length of it, took a lot of time to edit. So here it goes. Hope you enjoy listening to it as much as we enjoyed recording it.
Who it wants, you can hire who it wants, you make its own rules. It just can't violate the law, right? You know, there is a line, I feel, for police, and in general, I feel that the police shouldn't turn their backs on, like the mayors or the president. Like that's something we shouldn't do. But silent civil disobedience isn't against the law for anybody, right? It's everybody has that constitutional protection. The same way the president can still throw a fit, even though he's a president. We saw it with Donald Trump all the time. He's a child. He threw a fit all the time.
They don't, though. It's like police have that right. Citizenry don't anymore. As someone who goes to a lot of protests, like, no, as soon as it hits more than 2 hours, police just, the LAPD declares an unlawful assembly, and all of a sudden we're getting tear gassed, and all of a sudden people are getting shot in the face and the chest with rubber bullets for peacefully assembling in the street.
Well, and I always tell people, unfortunately, a key phrase in a riot is the first window broken. And most people don't know when that is. But of course, the police, with all their surveillance, they know when that is. And they're waiting for it, right? I believe personally. Now, not all places, but some places. I personally don't care if people block streets. I don't want them to block highways. I think blocking highways is very dangerous for them. And to me, it's like a public health risk. Like, ambulances travel on highways. Get off the highway. I've seen it go really bad. But the tricky thing about a protest is when someone in your outfit breaks the first window, it's because riots really don't erupt with assaults of other people. They don't really erupt with even assaulting law enforcement. They usually erupt with the first broken window of a business. It's a riot.
Well, and half the time that's an undercover FBI agent anyway. We've got the records from their coming to Provo.
We did see that. And
I mean, the CHP had to admit they have a program of literally having undercover cops go in and incite violence in the crowd. That was the California Highway Patrol. They had to admit it when 2 of their guys got found at the protest.
Yeah,
doing that.
And like I said, I tell police officers all the time, and I'm sure you can tell. I like to kind of call. I like to call balls and strikes on both sides, right? If the citizens do something bad, if a citizen does something bad, and I use citizen just as non-law enforcement, not that we're different in any way. Just non-law enforcement personnel do something bad, it's a strike. They do something not bad, it's a ball. The same way if the police, let's say, have a bad shooting, it's a strike. If they have a good shoot or a quote-unquote legal shoot, it's a ball, right? As much as we don't like it, it's a ball. And I think this is the problem is law enforcement just doesn't want to call strikes on itself.
Yeah.
The only reason I don't tackle the citizen, by the way, in this equation is because I don't feel the need to. We're not talking about, citizen. We can talk about citizen behavioral wrongdoings all day.
And it happens all the time. I'm not trying to say that, again, as someone who's been to a lot of these protests, I am not going to say that everyone on my side of the street always acted perfectly either. There's bad actors everywhere. The difference is we're policed.
Yeah.
Right.
I also would add on to that too is, when have you ever heard reports of police showing up at a Klan rally and starting a riot? When have you ever heard reports of police showing up at a Proud Boys meeting and starting a riot? The only time we have incidents where outside forces are provoking a riot so that they control people is during protests against police for basically murdering black people, and I think that's where it goes back to the racism element in there too, is there are unique circumstances that when you look at, let's say, a Black Lives Matter protest and then look at any other similar rally where it's predominantly white people that are, engaged, the treatment is demonstrably different across the board.
Yeah, when BLM showed up at the Lincoln Memorial, the SWAT team was out there, and yet on January 6th...
Well, I disagree slightly with that. I've seen the protest on YouTube where the Proud Boys show up somewhere or some dummy corp like them shows up somewhere, and the police do get aggressive. They do the same antics. Now, I don't know about, fake agents throwing bricks. I haven't looked into it that far, but I have seen, to my pleasant surprise, the police treat them the same. They treated them extremely the same in Washington, D.C., whenever they amassed there in front of the White House. And, they've been treated, the same everywhere else. I think the police fell into a trap in 2020, and it was the trap of predictability, right? The police thought that they can predict that, okay, at 7 o'clock it's dark, it's going to get violent, so we need to do this, 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 and that. And it wasn't always the case that was the case, right? Like, there were a lot of violent days, in my opinion, around the country, especially after dark, as it related to people rioting, shooting at police, breaking stuff, starting fires, the whole 9 yards. The question is, how heavy-handed do you want to be in that approach? Do you want to send troops out armed to the teeth in riot gear, look like you're ready for a fight? Because the only thing you're going to do is provoke a fight. That's my personal.
Yeah, you go looking for trouble, you find it.
Right. Or is it better to let them damage the property, and then you respond? Because at that point, it is justified. Like, you can't just burn down stores. I'm sorry. That's not how we operate. I don't think we should operate that way. We should protect people's life savings. You can't just burn down stores. I don't think it's okay. You can't just loot everything. It's not okay. And then the police respond with that heavy response and start declaring this is an unlawful assembly and go through the whole 9 yards. And when people fail to comply, then the police are allowed to box you in and arrest you. And I think that's okay, as long as you're given one opportunity to leave. Two, the police don't provoke you. Because I did see that. I saw videos in New York, like when the cop pushed the old man down, the old guy, and I think he shattered a vertebrae or something.
No, actually, it was honestly, again, you've surprised the hell out of me. I was not expecting. I literally expected 20 minutes of interview and you and I just to be going at it. And we actually have a lot more common ground than I thought. Seriously, like, we really do. But yeah, I have that one. I have a little fact sheet on that one. It was Buffalo, New York. His name was Martin Gugino. Gugino. It's like an Italian name. Gugino, yeah. And he got shoved down by 4 cops and smacked his head. He got a head injury. He actually has permanent brain damage. He was in the hospital for 4 weeks, and he still can't walk without assistance. And a grand jury went, nope, not enough evidence.
Yeah, and I thought that was inappropriate. I was like, look, just because someone isn't moving out of the area fast enough, we're already declaring something a riot, right? I'm already not going home. What's another hour going to kill me? If people are moving out the area,
you're getting OT at that point.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's all about control. If I've dispersed the crowd and people are moving out of the area, we've won. That's a victory. We've controlled the area. We've ceased the violence. People are leaving, right? Who cares if they're walking 2 inches at a time or 6 miles at a time? No one cares. As long as they're leaving, they're allowed to. And this is where I keep my mouth shut a lot while I'm at work, because my libertarian side really does bleed into how I feel right now. But I don't care if people walk away flipping me off saying, fuck the police. I'm like, okay, as long as you're leaving, I don't personally care what you say to me. I don't care. My skin is way thicker than that. And this is my job. This isn't personal. So you're not hurting my feelings by screaming that. Mm-hmm. You can scream ACAB and all that. I don't care. As long as you're leaving, I'm winning right now. I'm personally winning. This is making my life a lot easier. The issue is the police got impatient, so they pushed him. They shoved him. He wasn't moving fast enough. That's what it came down to. At least to me. He was old. He's shuffling around. He's not moving. He's probably a little confused, like, what's going on?
Well, and he was walking backwards,
Yeah, he's looking at these dudes who are coming at him with all this gear on, yelling at him. He's probably like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And he gets blasted by this guy with a stick. And I'm like, dude, I was like, come on, man. Like, come on, man. Like, we have to have, we don't have to have, we're expected to have way more control than that. And when he wasn't found guilty or wasn't fired, I was actually disappointed in that particular case. I was like, that's not okay, because you should have been held accountable for assault. I mean, you really hurt that person for no reason. Now, had that person turned around, I don't think you should be pushing 75-year-old men to the ground regardless. I mean, I'm 27. I'm pretty sure I can carefully subdue a 75-year-old man. But if you're like 33 and you're kicking at the shields and you're throwing the rocks at me, and I shove you and you fall and you hurt yourself, that we can argue about that.
But at that point, you've responded in tone.
Right. But if you're just standing there screaming F the police and I shield thump you and I break your nose, that's inappropriate. It's inappropriate.
because if someone flips you off and walks away, you're not doing paperwork, you know.
Right. They got their feelings out, whatever.
But again, but that's what happens, you know. It's like, and that's the problem, and that's part of that warrior mentality we're talking about, and part of that go get 'em attitude is, again, I mean, clearly you're an anomaly. You are not.
Yeah.
You are one of the minority. You are not your average guy. But it's like every other cop I've ever talked to, and I've had honest, off the record. I mean, we're getting recorded. I've talked to cops who aren't even like, there's no recordings. Like, we're talking in person at a barbecue having beers. And it's a totally different mentality. That mentality that you're talking about is rare.
Yeah.
You know, this idea of fuck them all happens a lot. And it's especially, and again, like you said, police are human beings, right? And they suffer from the same groupthink problems that people who aren't in a badge do. I think when you get enough people with enough adrenaline pumping, with enough riot shields and sticks, shit's going to go down.
It does, and it is real. It is really. I've been in riots. They're really intense. It is really intense. Your adrenaline is flying out the window. Like, and don't get me wrong, and the whole fuck 'em thing, that's a really bad coping mechanism. And not even with arrests, and even I've done that. You know, you come off a really bad shooting, and you're like, fuck it. Like, I just got to move on from that. But like, when you start saying, and I really try, I have to check myself actively, because you're right. The groupthink is a human thing. We all fall prey to it. And that's why you have to check yourself. And I catch myself sometimes with the fuck 'em mentality. And I'm like, no, it's not fuck 'em. They're people. No, we're not going to say that. When you start saying that, what does that even mean? Fuck 'em. What are they? Worthless, dispensable, useless? You can just do whatever you want? What does that mean? So I think, that's a groupthink mentality. And I think what we saw a lot in 2020 as well with police a reaction was, we saw humans. And not to be a cop-out, but police are people. They're going to get pissed off. They're going to get annoyed. They're going to get tired. They're going to get hungry. They're going to be sweating. They're going to be this. They're going to be that. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. And one of them's going to lose their temper. He's going to shove an old guy, and he should be held accountable.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the difference is, again, I mean, I'm on the other side of a lot of these. You know, I was in, you can look it up on YouTube. I was in Tahunga less than a year ago. And there was this big Proud Boys Trump rally going on. So, you know, a bunch of us on the other side showed up. And it was literally it was a political rally. This had nothing to do with police. You know, this was Proud Boys on one side and leftists on the other. You know, everyone's talking shit, throwing water bottles, right? And the police were in the middle trying to keep the peace. They were only facing one direction. You know, and I got to tell you, at one point, someone brandished a firearm. It wasn't on our side. But the cops were always facing our direction. And when they started shooting rubber bullets, it was our direction every time. And we were the unpeaceful side, even though they were the ones running across the street. And every time there was a physical altercation, it was one of them coming across the street. And this is my personal experience. So obviously I can't speak for what happens across the country. You shouldn't take my anecdotal activity as everyone. But it's like every time this happens, that's what I see is when the sides are equal, they're always facing one direction. You know, I've been to Huntington Beach twice now when actual Nazis are there doing their thing. And it's like, they're always facing one direction. And I think part of that is also, the Nazis aren't going to come and try to start shit with the cops. But that should also tell you something.
Yeah, small personal story. In, my department personally, when we handle stuff, we do alternating. So we have every other officer facing each side. That way there's no bias. We're only watching one side. I do like that we do that. I like that we do that, and that's not like a hidden secret. Like, that's just, you can observe that on the news. I mean, so like I do like that they do that we do that.
Which I think is good.
Yeah, I mean, there was one incident where some BLM protesters came to rip down one of the statues, and we were, of course, ordered to not let them do that. It's like the pinnacle of our city. It like literally defines the city. It's the whole name of the city is the statue. They came, a prayer group came, and then a white supremacist group came. So we alternated. The prayer group said, why are you facing us? They're the ones who are yelling at you. And I told one of them, I was like, well, that doesn't stop you from pulling out a pistol and shooting me, does it? That doesn't stop you from throwing bricks at them, does it? That doesn't stop you from antagonizing them, does it? They could be yelling at me, but they're really yelling at you because you're doing something to antagonize them, to make them more violent in front of me, so I get aggressive with them. That's why we watch everybody. And he's like, I didn't think about it that way. I'm like, I know you didn't. I did. That's okay. That's what I'm paid to do, is think about it this way, right? That's what they're paid to tell us. This is what we're paid to, think about. We think about these things. But it was especially interesting because the white supremacist group, which was actually a KKK faction from deep south in my state, there was only black officers on this police line. So they walked up, they gave every officer a bottle of water, they gave every officer a COVID mask, and they shook every officer's hand. Now I did shake all their hands. I'm not gonna slap their hand away. That's not professional of me. I'm not gonna do that. So it was just interesting because it's like, on one side, you knew what they were trying to do, and it was very cleverly planned.
They were hoping to invoke a reaction and show themselves as innocent, right?
Right. And they were hoping we would probably turn around and look at black people being irate to other black people, but we didn't do that. So I have seen what you're talking about, where they only face one side, and I really hate that, because I'm like, well, how can you tell the other side isn't making them angry by throwing up white power fists, or doing Sig Heil Hitler or something to agitate people, but all you're seeing is angry people, and then you assume they're angry at you, which is inappropriate. You shouldn't assume anything. The police should deal with facts and evidence. So how do we know? You don't know. Because I think that a group antagonizing another group is just as guilty as the group that then commits violence. Because had you not antagonized them, they would never have gotten violent. So you've caused everything that happened from that point forward. So that's why I always say I like when I see departments. NYPD did it for a minute, and then they stopped for some reason, alternating faces.
Now, my question on, and I actually think you have a very good point there, where you're talking about, even if someone throws the first punch, throws the first brick, whatever, right? That there is a I don't know, liability, but there is definitely a fault you can lay at the antagonizer. But then what would you say when the police are on that side? Because again, I mean, and this is what we see all the time. And now, granted, my experiences are only in Los Angeles, right? I can only tell you what the LAPD and LA County sheriffs do. I don't know what Tampa Bay, Florida PD is doing. I don't know what NYPD is doing. But what we always see is, again, when there's a peaceful protest, suddenly cops show up in riot gear. Suddenly, it's an unlawful assembly. Suddenly, there's tear gas. It's like, that's what instigates the violence every time.
Yeah, I mean, and I've seen it. So, for instance, like in Kenosha, after Jacob Blake was shot, saw the police react to violence, and that was good. The police should react to the violence. I have seen what you're talking about as well in Los Angeles, where the police are preemptive to violence, and that's a pitfall, right? That's a trap.
Yeah, LAPD's got a big problem with that one.
Yeah, you don't want to be preemptive, because if you show up in all riot gear, you're going to provoke a fight. Not because people want to fight you. They want to rattle the system, right? They want to hit the system. And unfortunately, human beings wear a uniform that represents a system of government, whether we want to admit it or not. That's exactly what it's looked at, as a system of our government. If it's failing, if it's seen as failing a certain group of people, then they're going to want to rattle that system. And you can be mad at them for doing it, but you just shouldn't have gone in the first place. They would have just probably went home, because certain groups also do things to gain attention of the police for that purpose. So like here, we had a group block the highway. We did get on our riot gear. We sat on the buses, and the leader of a riot team was like, we're not going to go out there unless they start getting violent with motorists. And in 2 hours, they got bored, dispersed, and nothing came of it.
Well, I wish there was a lot more of you on the LAPD, let me tell you, because that's the way it should be. I agree with you. Like, first of all, I believe in disarming the police. I actually think patrol shouldn't be armed. I don't believe no police should be armed. I think if there's a dangerous situation or there's something going on in neighborhoods, yeah, but having a response team ready to go if shit hits the fan is appropriate. But sending in cops covered in armor and riot shields when no one's doing anything violent, it provokes a response.
I can agree. I mean, I can agree. I don't think the police should make the first aggressive move.
Yeah, responding is one thing, and that's fair. If all of a sudden shit's going down and people are getting hurt, then I understand police moving in to keep the peace. Like that makes logical sense. We can disagree or whatever on the different aspects and applications of it, but I understand it. It makes logical sense. But it's when people are standing around, not a highway, standing around street intersections, with a grievance and holding signs, and all of a sudden, and I've been there, and all of a sudden they come rolling in, smacking their shields with their batons on loudspeaker saying unlawful assembly. You got 2 minutes, and paddy wagons start rolling up and they're launching tear gas. And it's like, well, my adrenaline pumps. I already know we're in for this.
Yeah, see, here's completely different. Like here, we can't do that. Like when the police walk, they strike their shin pads with their sticks. We can't do that here. That's been nixed here. Like we actually have a pretty good relationship with a lot of people who want to protest here. Even if we don't know you're coming, when we see it coming, like we just had one recently for Israel Palestine. When we see it coming, the protest forming, you guys are marching, we will immediately start blocking traffic. We allow people to march.
I've seen that happen too. That happens a lot where things start getting organized, and obviously the PD's like looking on social media, and I've seen like they're already blocking traffic ahead of time to make sure that static doesn't happen.
And I mean, the people here know, a lot of people here know, as long as you don't destroy police property like our stations and our headquarters, and you leave the courthouse alone, we're going to leave you alone. We really will. I mean, during one of the riots, they were breaking into businesses. We didn't even go. We were like, well, what are we going to do? You want to lock up 5,000 people? Not really. What are we going to do? And that's, I mean, in reality, there's way more citizens than there are police. So if they're going to break into stores in masses, what are you going to do? The only reason that we assemble to protect like headquarters is because there's evidence like for murders and rapes and stuff that we don't want to lose, right? That stuff we absolutely cannot allow. And I think it's like a moral thing. We will just never allow a station to be taken over and burned down. I don't believe, and morally, I wouldn't want that. That is very demeaning personally. I wouldn't want that either.
Now, I understand why you're against that. Don't get me wrong. At no point I'm like, I don't understand. Why don't you want the police station burned? Like, clearly.
Yeah.
That's not what you guys want. However, I would have to say, though, when you're talking about something like Ferguson, when you're talking about someone where clearly the police are very much in the wrong and have murdered someone in broad daylight, and the response is to throw rocks through a police station, like, you have to also be able to see that other side that, like, well, how is trashing the police station not a valid form of protest against major grievances like this?
I draw lines in sand with physical damage and property damage, and that's only because of this. If we start trying to say what is and what isn't a valid form of protest, that's how you get a lot of things that have happened and gone wrong in history. Not all forms of protest to me are valid. However, your protest is valid. If you're protesting against Nazis and your response is to punch white people in the face, that's not valid. We don't do that, right? It's not valid to destroy things. I don't personally think it's useful to break and destroy things, and so I believe that the police are allowed to defend that stuff. Also, I always tell people this, a lot of things are rocks, a lot of things aren't. And we have to remember a lot of police stations get burnt down because the police try to take that, well, they're just rocks approach, and then a Molotov cocktail slips through, and now we've lost rape evidence, murder evidence, we've lost cases, we've lost a lot of things. The police can't operate in a certain region now. I mean, in Portland, it was a complete blackout, right? They burned down the police station. It was a blackout in that area of no police because they couldn't patrol out of there. And then they designated into a chest. So it's like, you don't want certain things to happen. And unfortunately, looking at things like Portland, I don't think the police should allow that stuff to happen. Really, not even to the police station, really, but it's like anywhere. Like, I don't think it's useful to, I disagreed when I heard BLM leading activists in Chicago say, well, they have insurance, we can loot them, it's reparations, this, that, and the third. I'm like, no, that's wrong. We don't steal. It's, even if they do have a lot of money, it's their things. Technically, it's their things until somebody buys it. Now it's their things, but we don't do that. Now, I don't care if people, this is where people, again, hate me. Like me, I have friends on the right who are like, you're such a liberal. And I'm like, no, I'm not. You just don't like what I'm saying. I don't care if people like no on the flag. I don't care if you burn the flag. It's, if you bought the flag, burn the flag. It's your property. Don't care if you do it. Don't care if you kneel on it. I don't care if you put black tape around your mouth. I don't care. I don't care what you do to protest. Just please leave people and their property alone. That's all I ask. Because you don't want me breaking your property.
To be fair, that was a loaded question. I didn't expect you to answer any differently. I, again, don't necessarily agree with you, but what you're saying is logical. Like, I get it. You know, I will admit that was a loaded question. I was curious what, as someone who has an opinion different than a lot of police officers, I wanted to know where you stood on that. So I just want you to know I wasn't trying to set you up.
No,
I wanted to hear what you thought about that.
I probably stand the same as a lot of other police. Look, I am the same in some areas.
I disagree. A lot of cops don't. A lot of cops have a big problem with things like burning the flag.
Really?
And kneeling on. Oh yeah, big problem. I got to tell you, I got to do a really cool thing. I actually got to hang out with Joey Johnson, the guy from Johnson versus Texas, the Supreme Court case where they made it legal to burn the flag as long as you weren't harming anyone, you know. And we went out and into Hollywood and we burned the flag on 4th of July on Donald Trump's star as a protest against Trump. And no one did anything. We weren't stopped. Like, we were allowed to do it. But let me tell you, the crowd was not happy and the cops were not happy at all. They didn't, you know, again, nothing was violated, but no one's happy about that. That's an unpopular thing to do in this country.
A question I kind of had, because it's actually a perfect segue, Chris, because I don't think you can deny that this statement, that a vast majority of police officers in this country lean right. I don't think that's disputed.
It doesn't surprise anyone. Yeah.
Yeah. That statement I don't think is controversial. I'm not to say that there aren't left-leaning police officers, but I think most of them lean right. The conservative right in this country, in my opinion, has gone off the deep end of right-wing. I mean, they have gone full fascist at this point, and Trump has become their leader. I also don't think it's controversial to say that police as a unit in this country have lined up right behind them. He is supported by the police unions. They back what he says. They vote for him. They support him. A lot of police officers are Trumpers and proud of it. And because of this, police in this country have kind of hitched their wagon to this fascist, racist Cheeto. Well, I will never say all cops agree with this. Their unions and by default, the people they represent, i.e. cops, do support this. And so when you are supporting fascism and racism, whether or not you personally are a fascist or a racist, I don't think matters at that point, because you are now using your electoral power to put into place people that are fascist and racist. How do you, as a person who I think doesn't necessarily agree with those ideals, reconcile that when you see police unions all over the country saying, no, this is the guy that speaks for us?
You know, I don't think they should do that. In short, you know, I've seen on both sides, the left and the right, and politics in America has taken a complete abandonment of the middle ground. To be middle ground is like just devilish. You can't be in the middle. I think the left has gone off the deep end in some senses. I think the right's gone off the deep end in some senses. But one thing I will agree with you on, I think the police have sided with the right, mostly unions. Not that all police, because I work with plenty of liberal police officers as well. But I think the unions themselves and the people who make decisions for police and how policing will be ran or not ran side with the right because they feel attacked by the left. That's all it is.
Well, and I guess that's a good question because, like, again, you know, knowing right away, you know, your views, I know that you're obviously not a conservative Trumper at all. But when you say the left wing's gone off the rails, I don't know, you piqued my interest. In what ways do you believe that?
Yeah, I'm curious about that too, because I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna guess Chris and I are gonna disagree with you on that one.
But that's okay. I'm actually really curious, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, like I'm not against police reform at all. I'm sometimes against how we reform. So I've seen certain cities make it. So certain cities, I don't know if LA did it yet. I only heard LA might do it. You'd probably know better than me because you live there or you live in California. I know that New York has started doing it. Some other major cities started doing it, where they're kind of starting to loosen up on certain crimes like theft. And they're kind of.
I know LA has done. They've done a few things on that one. Where it's years ago, actually. Something that I agree with the LAPD on is they changed their law of not doing if a pursuit reaches a certain level, like a vehicle pursuit, right? and the guy's doing 112 down the highway, and it's getting real dangerous, and he doesn't have a kid in the car. He's not holding anyone at gunpoint. Like, literally, they ran his plates. He might have a warrant, and he took off. It wasn't anything crazy. They'll drop the pursuit so no one gets killed. And that is a good thing, I think.
I see that being reasonable. I guess to keep it like more big issue, I think when it comes to like, I've seen a lot of Democratic mayors close jails. Democratic prosecutors have closed jails. I don't agree with jailing and its purpose we have now. I do agree that some people do belong in jail. Like, there's just people who we should put into an actual jail. Mostly people being murderers and rapists, and I believe people who commit like armed robberies with use of weapons. I believe that when you have genuine harmed victims, people belong in jail. I just wish that jail was more rehabilitative than anything. But moving forward, I don't agree with a lot of the closing of jails around the country. I don't agree with a lot of the laying off of police. I was open to it originally, silently admittingly. I was curious on its impact, which the impact reported, from what I've read from mostly my left-wing sources I like to look at, has been poor for the cities. I'm not always a fan of defund the police, but not for reasons you might believe. I didn't particularly find that to be very helpful. I think the left has gone off the deep end sometimes in how they address police contact and shootings. So, for instance, Ma'Khia Bryant was a big one that I lost my mind on. And I'm
not familiar with that one. What was that one?
The young girl. It was a young girl who had a knife. She was charging another young girl, and the officers showed up, and within 10 seconds, he ended up shooting. Yeah. And people were like, "Well, should the police respond to knife fights? Knife fights happen all the time. Maybe the cop was racist." And it's stuff like that just drives me insane about the left, because I'm like, we're not even being logical anymore. What are we doing? But the same thing drives me crazy about the police with the right, with the bootlicking, right? And I know a lot of my Republican friends hate when I say that. The right bootlicks. They just do. They bootlick all the time. And sometimes I'm like, why are you bootlicking? We're wrong. Call us wrong. Just tell us we're wrong. Come on, man. Just be fair. And so I think both sides have gone off the ends if we're just in the realm of policing politically, where the right doesn't want to admit that the cops can be wrong ever. And the left is just like, well, the cops are always wrong. And I do make the difference between far leftists and Democrats. I think there's more Democrats than there are even people who say they're far left. I'm like, you're a Democrat, at least to me.
I have people who say they're like, "Oh, I'm as far left as it gets. I love Nancy Pelosi," and I'm like,
"Yeah, no.
Yeah, you're not quite as far as you think you are, buddy. Let's just
you are a centrist who likes gay people. That's it."
Yeah.
But but let's talk about that, because again, that's a good one. It's a specific case. It's got a lot of nuance, and you and I disagree on that one. So the 10-year-old girl with the knife. Now, I'll give you this. She absolutely. Now, first of all, yes, police should respond to knife fights. End of story. If someone has a deadly weapon and is assaulting another person with that deadly weapon, that is an instance that we need police officers for, right? Because now we're getting back into the vigilante justice. But I'm sorry, I'm not a trained peace officer. I don't have a vest. I don't have backup. I don't have anything. If I was out in the street, butt naked, and all I had was a firearm, and a 10-year-old girl came at me with a knife, I would not shoot her. I couldn't open fire on a child with a knife. It's like she was wielding a shotgun.
Well, she was 16 though. Does that make any difference?
16. Yeah, she was 16.
It does make a difference. Not as big as I just have a problem with minors. When it comes to when it becomes a firearm, I think that changed. That's why Kyle Rittenhouse is someone who I think should burn, because yes, was he a minor? First of all, he was 17, but yes, he's a minor. But on the other hand, it was premeditated, cross state lines, and he brought a firearm. And let's be real, we can talk about ADW all day long. As a police officer, I'm sure you agree with this. Firearms change everything.
Threat multiplier with a firearm is definitely massive.
Big time. Agreed. So you got a 16-year-old girl and she's got a knife. And you got a pair of cops who have all kinds of gear. And it's like, to open fire on a 16-year-old with a knife, I still find that to be, no pun intended, overkill. It's not needed. And if you're in a position where you can't hang out with and she was not big. I've seen pictures of this one. She was a petite human being. And if you can't take that on with your partner covered in gear without shooting, then you shouldn't be a cop. Like if you're that scared, because I'm sorry, that's a coward move. And I got to tell you, I've been talking to you for an hour now. I have a hard time believing you would open fire on a 16-year-old who had a knife, especially if you had backup. I have a hard time believing you would do that. I don't think most people who have a pair would. I think that's part of the scared mentality. I mean, look at Tamir Rice, same thing, a 12-year-old with a pellet gun. Now, granted, when the cops rolled up, it looked like a real gun, didn't have an orange tip. I don't blame them for having pause on that one, but it was what, 2 seconds? The entire incident. I mean, they literally rolled up, screamed out a window, and the entire incident was less than 2 seconds. The car hadn't stopped rolling when they shot him. They were inside the car and they shot a 12-year-old. And it's like, he's supposed to be more calm and collected than these two adults who are trained. So yeah, is a 16-year-old wielding a knife a good thing? Fuck no. Does that deserve a response? Absolutely. Does that mean two grown-ass men who are trained and are peace officers and are fully armed need to use lethal force immediately upon a 16-year-old? I don't agree with that.
I don't know what I would do, only because I'm not there in the situation. It all depends. Like, because I do have a very strong sense of protecting people's lives, and I believe that we should. I think it's it's the pinnacle of what we do. And if I can't save somebody's life, I'm useless. And so, had she been just armed with a knife and in the middle of the street, not charging anybody, not attempting to swing at anybody, and the cop just shows up and cancels her, I've been like, why? You couldn't have said, hey, how you doing? We couldn't have got a plan together. The only reason I give him this one is because he got out the car. He saw a fight in front of him between a grown man and another child. And then he saw another girl get up, he, according to his account and some other eyewitnesses' accounts, yelled, I'm going to kill you, or something to that nature, pull out a lethal weapon, and then charged another person defenseless, cowering against the car like, don't stab me. In that instance, I think a few things happened. He was put into what I call a compromised position.
Where he had to make a snap decision on whose life was more valuable?
Yes, and it has to be like that, because anything else later than that is somebody can be dead. He has to decide, do I stop this threat, or do I attempt something different like a taser or hands-on, but in the process, she could murder this other child. And he was out of taser range. That's what the police report says, what he said. And according to eyewitnesses, they were like, I don't think he could have taser either. Obviously, him running up there and putting his hands on her is a big danger for himself, being stabbed, and then also a danger for the person who could be stabbed. So it's very, very compromising, and it's a decision that honestly a lot of officers dread, because what is that right choice? I mean, and that's right. I told people this legally, as much as we all can hate this, but legally the shoot was lawful.
Yeah, she was going after another person with a deadly weapon.
Right, but I tell people this too. Two things can be true simultaneously. We can have a legally good shooting by a police officer, but we can also have wished that something different could have been done and explore options to perhaps how we could prevent that. Once I talked to a BLM person who was like, why don't you guys have beanbag guns? And I'm like, there we go. Why don't we have beanbag guns? Why? Because we abused them at one point, honestly, and they were taken away from us. But
I actually don't like that, because as someone who's been on the receiving end of that one, unfortunately, like, rubber. It's not just that. It's that you'll have officers more apt to use them when they shouldn't. Like,
right.
I think a beanbag shotgun is a really good replacement for a lethal weapon. The problem is it rarely replaces a lethal weapon. It usually replaces pepper spray. And that's the problem. It's like, again, I've been on the end of rubber bullets. They're supposed to be shot at the ground and bounce up into your kneecaps. And here in SoCal, they get shot right at people's torsos. People are losing eyes, And
that was an issue with like tasers, right? Tasers are classified less than lethal, but it is found, and we've seen it, so there's no reason to hide from the truth, this is something I don't like. I don't like to hide from the truth that they've been used as torture devices.
Mhm.
We've seen officers do it, and it's wrong. I think that's the fear of giving officers more non-lethal options to subdue people. But I admit, once again, two things can be true simultaneously. I don't know if you've ever done any kind of like combat, like me. I do jiu-jitsu, I wrestle. Subduing somebody is actually really hard.
It is. I did a few years of Hapkido back when I was a teenager. When you actually start subduing another human being, it is not easy.
Yeah, and usually requires a little bit of pain and a little bit of force. What the police have to juggle is, how do we not torture people, and how do we not severely damage them in order to subdue them? And I think that is one of them is not a fine line. Torturing somebody is pretty easy not to do, but the other one
unless
is a fine
you're
line.
Chicago PD. Like, we were talking about them earlier, losing some of their rights, and it's like Chicago PD had a torture warehouse where they would black box people for 48 hours.
I've heard about that. I haven't read into
Yeah.
that.
Oh, man, I'll send you a link. The Guardian did a great article on it, but it was on CNN. BBC even talked about it. It was an off-the-books Chicago Police Department. No one knew about it. And it was on the west side. It was called Homeland Square. And literally, they would take people and it was people they weren't going to arrest, because that creates a record, right? There's paperwork there. It would be informants, people who were tangential to suspects. They'd bring him in the warehouse, torture him for 2 days, not let him see family. Lawyers would literally show up and they'd be, told to get the fuck out. And they were held and tortured for days and then released to get information. I mean, it's like CIA black site kind of shit.
Please send me the link. I would love the link on that. I would absolutely love the link on that.
Yeah, Chicago PD's got a whole bunch of problems, on that one. And again, it's like, and that's, I think, where it kind of comes down to, is like, this is why I don't trust, because as soon as it's off the books, this is why, like you were saying, body cameras are great. And I actually completely agree with you. I think body cameras are fantastic, but it's like, there's always a way around it. And the problem is, secrecy breeds the ability to do anything you want. Again, this isn't about, necessarily people who are cops. This is about anyone. I mean, this is Stanford prison experiment kind of stuff. This is when you give people authority and anonymity, boy, I'm just screwing that one up.
And I forget what the experiment's called. You might be able to help me. When they use the college students and some of them were in prison.
That's the Stanford prison, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it boils down to that. I mean, we're, like I said, we're all humans, and that's exactly what. But this is why I said a part
and that's
of
what
police
jail
reform,
sucks.
Yeah, it's exactly why jail sucks. And I said this: a part of police reform should be regular mental health checks, like once a week. It should be built into your shift, because we should care so much. We're gonna pay you to go. You're gonna go once a week to speak to somebody about how you're feeling. They're gonna check on you. You can pick the person. It can be through your insurance. It doesn't matter, like, because that's a real thing. That's a real thing. Like, and it's been demonstrated multiple times. That's not the first experiment of its kind. It's a real thing. It happens to humans. We don't know what it is. It just develops.
Well, and look at the Milgram Experiments. I mean, that's an even more telling one, where they took the people, and this is the one that has been replicated a lot, is they took people and they had to control a dial on whether or not someone else got electrocuted.
I think that's what he was talking about, Chris.
No, he's talking about the Stanford prison experiment, where a group of students were pulled out. And honestly, what that study really shows is what happens when you have a bunch of Ivy League white men left to their own devices, if you ask me. But
I knew he was going to do it. I knew he was going to do it.
It's a whole lot of rich white boys in their 20s, and that's a very separate demographic, if you ask me. No shit, they got monsters, but they were separated. Half of them were prisoners, half of them were prison guards. And of course, that experiment has, not only is it unethical, but it's also it's come to light in recent years that some of it was actually staged and coerced, and so we don't really know. But again, it's a thought experiment that we can all kind of agree, like, yeah, that makes it groks really well with what we see in reality. The Milgram experiments were actually after the Nuremberg trials, when all the Nazis were basically saying we were just following orders. Basically, the researchers said, like, that no way, no way people would commit that level of atrocity just because someone in authority told them to. And so he literally set up all these, and it was across all age, gender, and racial demographics, as wide as he could make it. He cast a wide net for this one. And basically, there was two actors, a guy in a lab coat and a guy on the other end. There was a microphone and a speaker. and you had a dial. So the only person who was an actual unwitting experimenter was the one controlling the dial. And you were told the guy on the other end of the room was answering questions, and they would get harder as they went. And whenever he answered incorrectly, you were supposed to give him a shock. Every time he did it wrong again, you had to increase the voltage. And the doctors told you, like, he has signed up to this. He's volunteered for this. He's being compensated. He'll be treated. It'll be fine. But we're testing whether or not higher levels of pain increase or decrease cognition. And you'd be like, okay, I guess I'll press a button, whatever. And you'd go in and do it. And every time you did it, he would scream in more and more pain. Obviously, he was an actor. He wasn't being electrocuted, but you didn't know that. And there was a guy with a lab coat and a clipboard sitting behind you telling you to keep doing it. Eventually, by the end of it, a certain level, the person would start begging for their life and pleading and crying and saying they wanted out of the experiment, and this was hurting and this was terrible and they need out, and this is they're going to die, they don't want to die, and they do like begging for their lives. And the person in the lab coat would say, don't worry, it's just the pain talking, keep doing it. Turns out 80% of people did it until death, until it was a lethal dose of electricity. 80% do not question authority and will continue as long as they're being told this is what you're supposed to do.
Well, and the perfect measure of human evil is the Nazis. And this is why the American military after World War II adopted the principle of following orders is not an excuse. Because people will commit mass atrocity under the authority of somebody else and then try to attribute that evil to the other person. Well, they told me it was okay.
Yeah, but that doesn't. The problem is you're right, and that's absolutely correct. Is the Army did say that no, there is, you will go to border rights. There is a duty to not perform unethical actions, but it never holds true. As soon as someone goes against their commanding officer and against the flow, even if it's unethical, they go to court-martial. They were disobeying orders in a combat zone. I mean, that happened all the time in Vietnam, and these guys just got fragged.
Absolutely, and it's the it's like the two-way hypocrisy of the system. Like we don't want to allow something, but then we don't want to regulate it. Then after, we just want to be champions for saying we'll never allow this, and it's like we're gonna allow this. It's like why?
Well, and the same thing that makes us cringe at that, like willing to follow orders. We also at the same point go, well, but that's really necessary for a combat unit or for a police unit or for the judicial system or for politicians. Like we need people to unquestionably follow a law. And again, and you might disagree with me on this one because you're a police officer, but like my belief is that the law and ethics have never gone hand in hand. Slavery was legal, the Holocaust was legal. Women's suffrage was legal. These things were legal. Japanese internment camps were legal. The Trail of Tears was legal because it was done by executive order. Like something being legal has nothing to do with ethics or humanity. And when just because something is a good shooting or something is legal or fits the bill or can be protected, that never justifies it to me.
Right, and this might be one of the last few subjects I can cover if I have to get going in a minute.
Yeah,
but
sorry, it's gone a while.
No, you're good. I like it. No, and I agree. The law is created by humans who are subjective. We're not objective beings. It's really hard for us to do that, especially when there's a lot of us. And morals aren't something I find useful with law because what's moral and what's not. I don't. Particularly, I don't live in Gilead, so Christianity.
Morals are cultural.
Yeah, they don't particularly. Christian morals don't do anything for me, right? But I think we should have a stronger sense of, what's ethical. Is it right to jail people for 15 years for 2 buttons of fentanyl, even if it's their third time getting caught with it? Is that really what we want to do? Like, is that what we should be spending our money doing, or should we help to cure these people of an illness they have, which is their addiction, which is probably being perpetuated by their perpetual poverty that they're in and a lack of assistance. But the law is really weird to me. It really is, because as a police, I've ran into this a couple of times where I've been asked to do something and I'm just kind of like, no, I'm not gonna do that. It's wrong.
But that puts you in that 20%, which I hats off to you. I can respect it. That's a good thing. But that puts you in the 20% of humanity that's willing to question orders.
Well, and like I think it even happened in California when who was it? Orange County sheriffs wouldn't enforce
That's the Alabama of California.
It really
Yeah,
is.
I think it was. I really agreed with them. They would not make arrests on masking policies. They're like, no, I'm not arresting people for not wearing a mask. We're not going to forcefully put our hands on people, take them to jail if they don't want to go with us for not wearing a mask. And I'm like, good, you shouldn't. It's against the Constitution. If the health department wants to send them a fine, I'm okay with that. But we're not going to utilize law enforcement to. I mean, because ultimately, you have to ask yourself, I call it the then what questions, right? Put on your mask. No. Okay, then what? You get to a point where it's like, do you use force? Because you have to understand, like, at the end of law enforcement, when it comes to making arrests, this is where the Orange County Sheriff said this. He's like, you have to understand, when it comes to law enforcement, at the end of the day, if we say we're going to jail and you tell me no, I'm allowed to hurt you to take you. And he's like, I don't believe we should do that to our citizens. We shouldn't do that to the citizen population. And I was like, well, we shouldn't.
I don't necessarily think you're wrong, FYI. Like, for the record, I understand the hesitancy to use force for something like that. But my question is, okay, but what happens if I'm walking around to school with my dick out and I say, no, I'm not going to stop? Do you then use force to arrest me? Because you should. But how is that not different? If you could pull me over and I blow a stop sign, right? And you issue me a ticket and I say, I'm not signing it. I'm not going to sign my notice to appear. You're going to use force to arrest me at that point, correct?
We don't have that here. I think it's really interesting. I'm sorry.
Really?
We don't have that here. Like,
Oh,
we don't
wow.
have
I
that here
kind
for
of
that
assume it's
reason.
universal.
But I get what you're saying. It's just, I've always found California to be interesting. I'm like, why do they have to sign anything? If they don't go to their court date, they'll have a warrant. Like, just give them the ticket.
It's a really liberal town, except for when it comes to law enforcement. Our cops are
Yeah.
unhinged.
It's like weird. It's like, sign this piece of paper. Why? I fucking said so. It's like, no, just give it to him. If he doesn't go, he'll have a warrant. Who cares? Like, I don't care. It's such a weird concept. I'm sorry.
I agree. It makes no sense that, like, okay, fine, you didn't sign to appear, but it's like, we live in a digital age. The dash cam has got your plate and can see you. Like, we have evidence that you were cited and refused to show up for court. We can issue a bench warrant. Like,
Exactly. I can mail it to your house. I've had people not take the ticket, and I'm like, I'll just mail it to your house, dude. I know where you live. It's on your ID.
okay, so then that's a bad example. I guess, again, that's ignorance
I'm
of
sorry.
living here. I kind of assumed that was national. Okay,
Yeah.
but let's say, and this is a
We
bad
have our own
example, but
bubbles.
again, let's say I'm walking around town with no pants on, and you're like, hey, man, you can't be outside with your junk hanging out. And I say, tough shit. My body, my choice. I'm not wearing undies. That's my American right. You're going to have to, at some point, use force to stop me, right?
You know what? I'm actually really weird about this whole nudity thing. So
I agree with you, actually. I don't think it's a big problem. I think we should be showing kids nudity over violence. But,
I'm
in
really
terms
weird.
of the
Like,
law,
I have zero problems with nudity. I really don't. As long as people are keeping your hands to yourself and not assaulting people who are also nude, I'm okay with. And as long as we're not, being inappropriate with children, obviously, because there are places where nudity is like a thing. Like, you can there's whole communities with just nude people, and I'm like, that's cool. I want to move there one day. It sounds neat.
Oh, it's called college. You should try it out.
Yeah, I want to go. But as it stands in normal society, I believe the police should use force. Yes, do that. I believe that the COVID masks are different only because the COVID is not hurting anybody. It's not hurting anybody.
But it is, though. So look, there's documented
it's killing
evidence that wearing your masks protects lives. Like, you're preventing the potential spread of a disease that can kill. In fact, there's more evidence to show that wearing a mask protects people than there is to show that having your dick out in front of children harms them.
Well, you know what? I guess from a non-police standard, if I'm being consistent ideologically, the police shouldn't use force to arrest people for not wearing pants, because who cares? The same way you don't have the right to make me wear pants, you have the right to make me wear a mask. I mean, this is just my libertarian belief. Like, no, like, I should be able to. Now, if I go to work nude and my boss is like, "You're fired, get out," I demand you wear pants.
That's just suffering consequences for your actions in the private sector.
Yeah, you're free to do whatever you want in this society, but you will suffer the consequences.
Yeah.
I believe in that. But I mean, to be non-police me ideologically consistent, I would say no. The police shouldn't use force to arrest people with no pants, because who cares?
And then you do have me on that one. I mean, that's fair. Like, again, I will at least give you points. Like, you're not hypocritical. You're consistent. However, that sheriff will happily arrest people for not wearing pants and for not signing a ticket. And that's the hypocrisy, is we're not going to use force because it's their choice. It's like, okay, but it's also my choice not to wear pants. And it's my choice to do things that go against civil, rest or whatever you want to call it. But it's like, if I'm going to refuse to do something where I'm not harming another, I'm not causing violence, I'm not instigating anything, like I'm living my own life and people don't like it, it violates a code, but I am not running around with a sledgehammer, right? Then I shouldn't be arrested. It's like, your viewpoint is consistent, but that sheriff's is not.
Well, what's funny is I've used this argument because I'm a political podcaster myself, and my right-leaning colleagues, I've argued with them on my conservative, they're more conservative-leaning colleagues on abortion. I'm pro-choice, and I'm like, but a lot of them are pro-life, and I'm always like, so I can't lock you up for wearing a COVID mask, but I can lock you up for getting an abortion? How is that at all ideologically consistent? And of course they have an excuse, and I'm like, but and it usually is referred to, well, I don't have to do this, it's my body. And I'm like, well, then she doesn't have to carry babies, it's her body. So it's really funny. It's like, I remember this argument used on me, and it forced me to be more consistent than I was really trying to be. And I'm like, it's a damn good argument. I can't believe that's why people, that's how people feel.
Conservatives tend to have a hypocrisy when it comes to body autonomy. It's they want to say you're free to do whatever you want. Also, don't be gay. Don't have an abortion. It's like, okay, well, I understand wanting a small government. I don't disagree because I'm a socialist. I want a big government, but like Republicans want a government so small it fits into your bedroom.
Yeah,
and that's all. But we're off topic. I know time is running short. I wanted to ask you one question.
All right.
And it's a big opinion piece on this one that, like, again, we can agree on good or bad shootings or whatever. But there is definitely, nothing has changed with police action. In fact, if anything, over the decades, I think police have probably been using use of force less than they have. I would say policing has become less violent slightly over time, right? Just like crime. Crime
rates have dropped significantly. Like the trend for crime in the U.S. and across the world is actually going down every single year.
Yeah, and I believe it's less steep, but I also believe that use of force by police is also starting to go down. But what's happened recently, we hear about it so much, is there's greater visibility in it, right? And I would ask you that, like, on cases, what I am seeing from the left perspective is one of the best ways to prevent that is accountability. If we're going to say that, like, these guys who are doing this do not represent all of us, I'm going to go ahead and go out on a limb and say that's kind of your position, is that the guys who do this stuff is not every cop. This is a small percentage of us who are really shitty. Then the best way to do that is to shine light on it and to hold accountable. But unless there's a video, there's almost no chance of accountability. And if there isn't, it's almost non-existent. And it's like, yeah, there's George Floyd and there's Laquan McDonald. There are outliers, but they're rare. Usually we get Martin Gugino, who gets pushed down. We get Breonna Taylor for a no-knock warrant who gets shot. We got Eric Garner, who died for selling fucking loose cigarettes. You got Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old who was expected to be more responsible than two trained grown-ass men. Freddie Gray, 25-year-old, gets died because the cops didn't like him, and so they handcuffed him and threw him in a paddy wagon and went off-roading to teach him a lesson. They shattered his spine. These guys got completely off. DOJ wouldn't do anything. Grand jury let him off. Tamir Rice, no indictment. Eric Garner, nothing. Breonna Taylor, the only guy who gets in trouble is the one who shot at white people's apartments. And that's my issue. And there's no accountability. That if you're gonna, it would seem that if in fact the dirty cops are such a tiny majority and the rest of you guys hate them, then why is it that police unions constantly defend them and DAs constantly defend them? And you're a rarity, but most police will not talk about it and back each other to such an extent that it prevents it. And it's kind of, I've used this example before, that if Matt and I go and rob a bank, right? And I'm waiting in the car with the getaway car, and he runs in there with a gun and shoots someone, robs the bank, comes out, jumps in the car, and we take off. Like, even though I can say, I didn't rob a bank, dude. I didn't shoot anyone. I don't believe in that. I'm nonviolent. I just got my friend out of there. I'm complicit. We're both bank robbers. And it's the same thing, is that, like, we have, even if it's a small minority, that's why at least not liberals, but leftists say ACAB, and there are no, all police are racist in a racist system, because it's all this, we see this giant fraternity of brotherhood of them backing each other up, even if it's not privately, publicly, always having each other's backs and always taking the side of the other police over anything else. And my question to you is, how do you feel about that monologue I just laid on you? And what do you think the solution is for accountability as a police officer who does see an issue?
Yeah, and when I see things like ACAB and the general placement of everybody in law enforcement into a big group, I always say you're not seeing the inner workings. There's more, and it really is changing. I think not. I think before George Floyd it was changing, but after George Floyd, it's like on turbo accelerant nitro. You are seeing a lot of police officers in those orange jumpsuits, like the lady who shot that guy in Minneapolis. I forget what both their names are, but she meant the I accidentally drew my taser lady, that dum dum.
Oh yeah,
yeah, that clown. Yeah, she immediately went to jail, and I was like, good, she should go underneath the jail, right? And I think we're seeing more of that, and I think that's a good thing. I think, and I think as we get younger policemen, newer policemen, we propel into a different. I believe that we are propelling forward. I do believe with every generation, we are shattering, racial biases. We are shattering, racism. You're seeing more mixed families, more mixed children. I think it takes time, and time is hard to give when people's lives are being lost to bad decisions by people who make bad decisions. But I do think it's changing. It's changing in departments. You see DAs not jumping on board and in bed with the police anymore. You see chiefs, IEDs more willing to put cops on Front Street. From somebody on the inside, I can tell you now, that blue wall is deteriorated. If you punt somebody in the face while they're in handcuffs, if you do something to somebody, you will be told on. Because ultimately it's been ingrained, at least in us. If I see you do that, I don't say anything, I'm probably going to share the cell with you, because it is police do have a duty to report, and it's not report citizens who want police reports, report each other, and that's actually a law. People forget that's a law. It's a law by the Supreme Court. We have to report each other. We do. And departments have laws and rules, and states have laws and rules, all 50 of them, that the police have to report each other for wrongdoings. And they've recently been stepping up the punishment to include prison time for not reporting abuse of authority, racism, stuff of that nature. And I think it's good. I think that we should be holding officers accountable. And, I hope that we find fairness. For instance, in Micaiah Bryant, I know they were going to prosecute him, and I said out loud that would be the death of policing, because that would be a overstep, in my opinion, of accountability. That'd be the death of your policing in America, as you probably know it. I think the solutions are, one, you need to get officers re-engaged in the community. Officers should go to schools and talk to the kids. They should do more community engagement. I think we need to reform laws, right? Like, personally, if it was up to me, I'd legalize all the drugs and destroy 90% of traffic-related crimes, less they're moving violations, and we would go from there. I think there needs to be a complete overhaul in what we think of with violent crime. I think there needs to be a complete overhaul of how insurance is used to, for example, theft-related crimes, break-ins of businesses, stuff like that. I think there needs to be a complete overhaul on how we look at the system. We need to do an overhaul in education. There are direct correlations to crime between education and poverty. And unfortunately, in this country, Black and brown communities are suffering the most because they populate mostly densely urban areas such as inner cities. And those inner cities around America have failing schools, like Detroit, like New York, like where I live. The schools are failing. Kids aren't going to school. And it's creating a mass suffering. We need to fix that too. I think, even as a libertarian, I think some form of UBI is probably good. People don't have any money. And you can't just tell somebody to go get money. It doesn't work that way.
You are the worst libertarian I've ever heard of. This is amazing.
I know.
I was going to say, it's scary that I find myself agreeing with a libertarian more than I do with most liberals.
Are you sure you're a libertarian? You're not just anti-oppression.
Well, it's weird. Like, people don't think that, like, so, like, libertarians would say you can do UBI if you eliminate the social safety net. That's what we would say, and I would be like, okay, you know what I'm saying? Like, UBI isn't really foreign to libertarians or the left. It's something that they've both actually worked on quite a bit. It's just I find that more of my left friends say, well, we need a safety net and UBI, and I say no safety net but UBI, and then we just argue from there. But you know, and I'm the kind of person, because I did it. I am admittingly a bootstrapped, pull yourself up kind of guy. I say it. I do. I know people hate it. Too bad. But I've seen people do it. I do it. But I realize not everybody can do it. It's just the way it is. It's just how it is. But people, when they get assistance, because people don't want to use the government for money. Some people really do hate it. But when you properly assist them and propel them out of poverty, move them into decent neighborhoods, move them into places where property value is higher, where they're not going to experience this violent crime, the trauma of living in violent crime neighborhoods, you're going to actually help people out a whole lot more, right? Also, mental health reform, which we didn't touch today, but I'll say it. Mental health reform is always my first go-to for police reform, because the majority of people who are shot by police or people who come into contact with police they're just mentally ill and they're not medicated. And
Thanks, Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, and I mean, and in the world's richest country, I don't understand why we have violent schizophrenics wandering the streets, self-medicating with heroin and fentanyl, and not taking their regimen, and their only excuse is why I can't afford it.
Yeah, and we refuse to give them care. We'd rather have people who have, again, paranoid schizophrenia. We'd rather have them on the streets than give them care.
Right, and this is once again where people, I argue with libertarians on this too. We can have universal health care next to a very healthy privatized healthcare system. I don't see why not.
Agreed.
Yep.
Two things can be true simultaneously. I'm not going to use government healthcare. I already have department healthcare. I have military healthcare. I'm in the Army. I have private healthcare through my life insurance policy. I have my own healthcare. I won't be taking from the system. Give this to somebody who needs it, right? So I think those are things we need to address. I think that we need to address some areas of disproportionality, and the police need to be honest about the history of policing. The war on drugs was a failure. We did target, even if it was an accident, we targeted people during the war on drugs who are brown and black. Even if it was an accident related to poverty, we targeted people with stop and frisk. We need to admit that, and then we need to work to better that. On the other hand, I think that citizens need to give the police, and I know people are probably listening to this like, this guy with a fucking cop, he just bashed on the cops all day. No one's being honest about policing and what our screw-ups are, right? But I will say at the end of this, I do think in some sense the police or the citizens, they need to give the police a small olive branch. They did it here with us, and so far it's going really well. We've implemented changes, social workers for mental health calls. A lot of things are going really good here now. No, there's not a lot of that tension between us and the between the cops and the citizens. And I think in a lot of places they're missing that. In New York, they're missing that. In Chicago, they're missing that. They're missing that olive branch of, there has to be a certain acceptance that cops are people and they're gonna make mistakes. They will make mistakes. But I think citizens will one day hopefully be able to trust enough that when those mistakes occur, if they're wrong, people will go to jail. And if they're right, if the mistakes were, if somebody is shot or they're tased and they're hurt, that the police were in the right, so to speak, legally. But if they were wrong, they will suffer consequences. And I think that a combination of those things, to include obviously prison reform, would severely help what we experience today. But of course, our current system has a problem with walking and chewing bubble gum. So we will see.
I agree. Yeah, I think
100%.
if we can do something like make police unions less toxic, again, it's like airplane pilots are human beings who make mistakes, but we don't tolerate a lot of mistakes from them for the same reason that we shouldn't tolerate those kind of mistakes from police officers. And I think if we have accountability, like you were saying, like I think, that veil being lifted, that's changing. I think when there's a bad shooting that is not, I'm not talking about, things weren't within policy or whatever. I'm talking about, like when they shoot someone in the back who's running away, when they go with a no-knock warrant and kill a woman who's sleeping in her bed, these guys need to spend the rest of their lives in prison. And once that starts happening as policy, I think you will see public trust return to policing. And I think one of the reasons public trust has eroded so much is because, and this is sad to say it, but this is when change happens in America, is when white people figure it out. White people are starting to go, oh my God, there's some racial disparity in the United States. We should do something about it. And it sucks, and I don't like it, but
It's not sad to say they're the majority. They make up a majority of lawyers, politicians. It's not sad. It's not sad to say. It's sad it's taken so long. That's what's sad. But I always tell people, and I argue, there's a certain group of black and brown people I bicker with on stereo about this. You need white people because they make up a lot of the system. We need each other, right? We need each other, hear each other from all sides. And that's why I like having these conversations about policing. One, I think it's really healthy that people see that we are people. We're not all the same. We do differ. It's good to get these conversations going, and it's good for people to hear these conversations, because you never know who's listening to this broadcast. You never know who's listening on stereo, who's listening to my anchor. Somebody could be like, "That's a damn good idea. Let me do something about that," or let me have that conversation too. It could be a teacher. It could be a researcher. It could be a politician. It could be somebody you don't even know. So that's why I'm a big fan of these conversations.
Yeah, and I think these are good ones. Now I'm not surprised. I was very surprised in the beginning when I found out there was a police officer who wanted to come on our show. I was like, has he heard us? But like, I get it. And that's the thing, is you are an anomaly in policing, and we need cops like you.
Yeah, you
People
should
who
be
are
the
willing
norm.
to say, this is correct, this is not correct. Citizen or officer, it doesn't matter. We're held to a standard in the law. That's what we need. And I hope we get more like you, because there's too many police not even necessarily committing egregious acts. There's far too many police covering for the egregious acts, and police unions were basically the NRA of unions doing this and defending the undefendable. And it's like, as soon as that cone of, again, I don't know what goes on in IA or in the departments. You're right, we don't see the inner workings, but all I can say is what happens in the public sphere. And the public sphere is secretive. We have shootings where the police departments and the DA are censoring the videos and not letting people see it. And it's like, this is killing trust. And until I know that people who shoot unarmed black men are going to go to prison, then I don't trust that it's not happening when I'm not looking at this on a camera recording it. And I think if we can get more people with this viewpoint who aren't hardcore authority-loving bootlickers and people who actually think critically in police departments, that's when we're going to see more change.
I agree 100%. And honestly, like you, Chris, I'm pleasantly surprised with the way this goes, and I actually prefer this to what we expected.
Because that was going to be a fight. We had conversations. Wonderful.
Yeah, if we're going to give a voice to any police officer, I prefer giving it to somebody like Lemar, because I do think your viewpoints not only need to get out to the public, but they need to spread amongst police officers as well. Because I honestly, I don't, as we've said, we don't believe that you are the norm, and you should be. We don't agree on everything, but there is, at least we agree there's a problem. And when we agree on that, then we can start debating solutions. But if we can't even agree on the problem, which most police officers in this country I don't think can, how are we going to find a solution?
Yeah, I got to say, Lemar, I still disagree with you on some finer points, but I don't doubt your intentions. And I think that's a big difference.
Yeah, thank you, man. I appreciate it. No, this, I've done this before, and it's been like 3-on-1, didn't quite go as smoothly. It's like, that was really my only concern. But I kind of, just from the beginning, I was like, these guys are pretty cool. This is going to be a good conversation.
Well, we actually had that talk. There's three of us.
And we did have that exact talk.
Yeah, he was like, I'm going to bow out, so it's not 3-on-1. And Matt and I were like, okay, dude, we can't come out swinging, being like, how come cops are killing Freddie Gray? We got to this dude has taken the time to come on a show that is already against police violence and is willing to come out here and do this. Like, we need to come at this from a stance where we're not going to be talking over or combative or any of that. So like, and you were the same way. Like there was a lot of, I think we did a lot of principle of charity in this conversation. So I want to say I appreciate you being here, man. I really do.
Same. It takes stones to come into what most people in your position would perceive as the lion's den. I don't think it is, because like Chris said, we do a pretty good job of trying to vocalize that we will hear anyone that's against us. We're probably not going to agree with most of them, but we'll hear it. And so I think it shows a lot of character for somebody to come into an environment that like this and be willing to engage, because I don't think a lot of people in your position would be most cases.
Yeah, no, I agree. I thought it went really well. Like, like I said, yeah, we disagreed on some things, but rather than, obviously I'm not going to change your mind in an hour. You're not going to change mine. So there's no point. Let's just move on and find that common ground again. So I thought this went really well. I'm actually really, thank you for giving me the opportunity to come on and talk to you guys.
Absolutely, man. And we'll probably, next time there's some horrible thing in the news, we'll probably reach out to you for a quote or something. But before you go, you're a podcaster yourself. Give yourself a 30-second plug, man. I would love to, our listeners, if you guys liked what Lemar said and thought he had some good points and thought what he was saying grokked with you, like, Lemar, what are you working on? Where can our people find you?
People can find me on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find a lot of your podcasts. My podcast is It's Views from the Arch. You can find me on Twitter. I'm sorry, not Twitter, Instagram. I use my Instagram a lot. Just look up It's Views from the Arch on Instagram. I'm utilizing an app that a lot more podcasts are jumping on, Stereo, which I don't work for them, by the way. I just podcast on there. So you can find me as It's Views from the Arch on Stereo as well. But yeah, and whenever I release this episode, I'm not going to edit or anything. You guys can just click the link tree and wherever you want to find me. Oh, YouTube. I'm on YouTube. How did I miss that one? Feel free to go to the YouTube and subscribe and watch some of my videos. Maybe you'll like me. Maybe you won't. But hopefully you'll listen anyways.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for being here, man. This was an awesome thing to do. We've wanted to have someone from the law enforcement viewpoint come on here. So I appreciate you doing this, man. I really appreciate your time.
All right. Hey, you guys too. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And there you have it, folks. That is the conclusion of the Alt Left's interview with a cop. It did not go, as you could tell, any way we thought it would. So one day we'll have someone who we can actually argue with on here. But it was refreshing to hear a different perspective, right, Matt?
Oh, absolutely. I think that was great. I prefer where we can find common ground and find things we agree on. My biggest problem with the right, and by extension, I think that tends to encompass most cops, is that we can't agree on anything because we can't agree there's a problem. I mentioned this in the podcast. It's, if we can't even agree on a problem, how are we going to find a solution? So I think it was really refreshing to see that he at least agreed with us on those points. As we said in the podcast, there's a few other things that we don't necessarily agree with him on, but I think if all cops were like him, we might not be having the issues we're having today. You know what I mean?
I think we would still have problems because he's authoritarian by nature, which I still have an issue with on that one. But yes, I would agree. I think if most police would at least recognize that militarization is wrong, no-knock warrants are stupid, that is a start. I think that is the best way to get rid of some of the most egregious errors. And some of the things we disagreed on are still vitally important. I'm sorry. Qualified immunity is garbage. Grand juries deciding whether or not prosecution happens is absolute garbage. Again, like I said earlier in the interview, if you or I go out and shoot someone, we don't get a grand jury deciding whether or not maybe a case will be presented. No, we get a DA who looks at it and says yes, and then it goes to trial. And I believe that if you don't have equal justice for those who are supposed to be carrying it out, you don't have justice at all. And again, I really liked this interview, and this guy was an anomaly, not like I usually think at all. But at the end of the day, there are no good cops in a racist system. And I think the issue is systematically. This isn't about hugging it out. I don't need to see more cops going to barbecues in inner city neighborhoods, and I don't need to see Molotov cocktails. No, we have systematic problems, major ones, and we need them to change. And I think these dialogues, maybe they'll do something, maybe they won't. I don't know. But it was very interesting to hear a viewpoint that was neither ours nor your typical cops. This was a lot of fun to get a third view.
Agreed. And I'm hoping we can have him back on again.
Yeah, I hope so too. That'd be great. He did a great job.
So yeah, and once again, just everyone, thank you. The last thing I want to kind of end this on is our housekeeping stuff. We always do this. I'm really just trying to get the word out. We've seen our listener base grow. We're into triple digits now with our listener base, and it's growing every week. You guys have been great. We're getting more and more feedback. Keep that coming. Absolutely, comment, like, share, especially the last two, because the best way that we can expand even further and keep this thing going, and maybe start adding in some more high profile guests, is if we get the word out. If we grow, we got to get into the quadruple digits here if that's going to have a prayer of happening. And the best way that you guys can help us do that, share this with your friends, have them like us, have us review this. That's the biggest one. Likes, follows, and reviews. Those are the big three. If you guys can do that, we have a chance of really turning this into something more than just a rinky-dink little podcast, which is beyond anything we could have even hoped for. So thank you for what you've been doing. Continue to share us out there, continue to comment, continue to subscribe, and help us get the word out, because I think we're starting something here. This feels good, feels right. And I want all of you guys to be a part of it and help us grow this podcast to be the best that it can be.
And thank you guys for being here every week with us. I appreciate it. Thanks for joining us on the journey of our pet project and what we love doing. So we will see you next week with a whole new episode, fresh off the grill, little tasty nugget of alt-left goodness for you. It'll be good for your body's constitution. Until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and remember, kids, the revolution is you.